All right. Today we are going to do I'm hoping, pretty brief whole class sort of review session. I'm going to walk through in a very quick way a lot of the history that we've discussed. If nothing else, hopefully kind of remind you of some of the groups, some of the developments, some of the beliefs, some of the big events that transpired from prehistory all the way up to the year 1750. That is what the semester exam covers. So 1750 means the stuff we've done over the last week or so, the political revolutions, the Enlightenment, that stuff is not on the semester exam, okay? It's just everything leading up to that, going back to the very beginnings of history, the stuff that we covered at the very beginning of the year, all the way up to our age of exploration and maritime empires, colonization, stuff like that. So that is the time span. So, of course, kind of refine your studies to that. Today, I'm going to show you a series of maps, a few different pictures. I'm going to be dropping all sorts of clues for you as to things that you need to know about for the semester exam. I'm not going to talk about every single thing that we've done. I'm not going to talk about every single group of people that we've talked about. So just know that if I'm mentioning something and it seems kind of random, like, hey, why is Mr. Brown skipping all this stuff? But he's really focusing on this. Guys, it's for a reason. I'm trying to give you some good clues as to some of the information you need to know for the semester exam. So pretty much every word that comes out of my mouth when we get started on this thing is designed to give you clues of things that you need to know. My advice, have your notebook out. Things you're like, oh man, I completely forgot about that, or things that you think are going to be points of emphasis. Maybe just kind of jot those down as we go. That way you kind of know that those are some areas to definitely emphasize on. There's no way I can get over every single thing that may be on there, but I'm going to try to really do a good job pointing you in the right direction. So we'll go through this PowerPoint. It's not many slides. I think it's maybe 6 or 7. And like I said, it's all pictures. It's all maps. At the end, I'm going to just remind you about a couple of resources you can always use to get ready for tests like this. And then we'll be done for the day. If time permits at the end, again, you guys are first period, so it's hard to really say how long this is going to take. But if time permits, I will try to give you at least a little bit of time to continue to work on your test review. But, that just kind of depends on how quickly we can move. Remember, your test is tomorrow, first thing. It's 47 questions. You will have 75 minutes to get it done. You need to get it done, when you're supposed to get it done. Sign day, assigned time, that's more applicable for the kids at home. You are going to take this in Eduphoria like you've been taking exams in other classes. So no need to do Canvas. You're just going to go to your single sign-on. You'll log into Eduphoria. The test will be available for you. And, you need to get it done before the end of class. That'll be about 75 minutes. The other big thing, no retakes, but again, I'm going to try to help you guys out as much as I can. I've already said if you're passing, for the semester, this isn't going to fail you. I'm going to try to structure the grades in such a way to where it doesn't really kill anyone, but you need to try to do your best. This could definitely help you out, especially if you're kind of on the borderline for the semester between an A and a B or a B and a C, or unfortunately a C and an F. So give it your best shot, give it your best effort, and you'll be in good shape. Couple closing announcements, semester exam review. Yeah, your semester exam is tomorrow, but the review is not actually due until 1:05 on Friday. I would still recommend you get it done in advance. I think it'll help point you in the right direction further as far as what you need to study. But remember, the best thing to study is always your notebook. And hopefully, based on what we do today, based on what you see in the review, hopefully I'll kind of refine what you need to study in your notebook. Last thing, for those of you that have not turned in some stuff, namely the second notebook check that is still being accepted. There's still a good amount of things that are being accepted. If it's still open in Canvas, I will still accept it. Not everything's still open, but a lot of things still are. But Friday's kind of the last day. And on the notebook check number 2, man, if you didn't turn that in, you're probably failing for the 6 weeks. So check your grades. They're up to date. Everything I have currently is in there. Double check it. If you see a mistake, it's possible. You need to let me know. But yeah, let's do everything in our power to try to raise our grades as much as possible before the end of the semester. So this is your little whole group semester exam review. We're going back to the dawn of time a little bit, all the way up to 1750. Unit 0 was historical foundations. That's the stuff that's not actually part of the College Board curriculum anymore, but you kind of need to know for everything to make sense. That's all of our ancient civilizations. Our actual curriculum starts in the year 1200. 1200 to 1450 was the global tapestry, kind of telling you who was all around, what they were doing, and our networks of exchange, the big trade networks that connected these groups. And then unit 3 and 4, that's what we recently worked on. First, we had the land-based empires, some of the new people that kind of rose on the scene from 1450 to 1750, people like the Russians. And then we had our transoceanic connections, largely dealing with maritime empires, and even before that, the age of exploration. So one of the first things that we talked about in this class was, for most of human history, we're not settled down. You're hunter-gatherers. People moved around for a very long time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. We literally hunted and gathered for what we needed. Then about 10,000 years ago, probably by accident, in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, people figured out how to farm. They started planting crops. That was called the Neolithic Revolution. And even though it took some time afterwards, once people learned that, they settled down, and eventually what we call advanced civilizations started to kind of spring up. These early advanced civilizations, they almost universally centered around river valleys, which kind of makes sense. You got rivers for water and transportation and to grow your crops. A lot of these river valleys also had fertile soil. Now, I'll be straight with you. There's not a whole lot on the test over these civilizations, so I don't want you to kill yourself remembering all the facts about Mesopotamia and Mohenjo-Daro and stuff like that. Rather, remember some of the themes that come out. Again, these are the earliest civilizations, and a lot of the real broad themes, things that they institute, do carry over into other civilizations. So, couple things. First, and a lot of these are not good, patriarchy. You got to know what patriarchy is. Patriarchy just kind of refers to male domination. For whatever reason, what's up? Elijah, will you open the door? For whatever reason, once we settled down, men started to become very dominating. Okay, women, were in some cases treated as property. And that ill treatment of women, that's unfortunately something that we see throughout history, even to some extent to this day. But most of your early civilizations, heck, most of your civilizations that we've talked about thus far in history, very patriarchal. Typically, the further back you go, the worse it gets. But patriarchy is one of those things that just persists, in a lot of the governments of these civilizations, even later civilizations that were somewhat democratic, women didn't have rights, not the same as men. Again, so patriarchy is certainly something to remember. Even some of the early legal codes reinforced that patriarchy. You may remember the Code of Hammurabi. Again, it was one of the earliest legal systems, and it was, very much based on the idea eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, let the punishment fit the crime. And on one end, that seems relatively fair, but on the other hand, people weren't treated equally. It did reinforce that social hierarchy, the social stratification you see in these societies. It did also reinforce, the ideas of patriarchy. Later legal codes will do the same. The ancient Romans had a really good legal system based on the 12 tables, very, very similar as well. So patriarchy is a running theme you're going to see from that point running forward. The idea of social stratification, social hierarchy, social classes. You see in just about every civilization throughout human history a very strict system of social classes. We still see stuff like that today, okay, but it's much less formalized. There's much more social mobility than there once was. But in just about all of the civilizations we've discussed thus far, there's a social hierarchy that kind of determines what you do for a living and what you own and who you're allowed to marry and all that stuff. Again, that sort of system is strict social stratification. You'll actually see that term on the test, social stratification. It is a continuity in history that is formulated all the way back then. Now, back then, in really all these really early civilizations, the people were generally polytheistic. They believed in many gods. It's a little bit after this that you see more monotheistic religions kind of come to the forefront. But as a part of their polytheistic belief systems and as a part of their government, most early leaders, most early kings claimed to either be gods, to be descended from gods, or to be chosen by the gods. Even recently, we were looking at European history, in the 1700s, and European kings were still claiming divine right, that God put them on the throne. All the way back then, under the Zhou dynasty, right after the Shang, you've got the Mandate of Heaven, where again, the leaders of China claim to be chosen by the heavens, chosen by the gods. Early rulers did that, and they continue to do that throughout history to justify their rule, to explain why they have nearly unlimited power and other people need to follow them without question. Leaders throughout history are always doing things to legitimize their authority, claiming they're descended or are gods. They also a lot of times build monumental architecture. We see it throughout history. You can look back at the Egyptian pyramids. You can look more recently at like the Mughal Empire when they built the Taj Mahal. You can look at King Louis XIV and the construction of the Palace of Versailles. You can look at all those churches that we see the Russian Empire build, like St. Basil's Cathedral. Guys, yeah, a lot of times they are tied to religion, but they're also a projection of strength. People look at that and they say, oh man, the person that had this constructed, they have wealth, they have power, they need to be respected. What other things? Really all these civilizations, and pretty much all civilizations throughout history, trade. And this goes back to the very earliest ones. We see signs that the people of Mesopotamia, for instance, traded as far as the Indus River Valley, which is a pretty long journey. Now, obviously, we understand why people trade. They have something we need, we have something they need, that makes sense. But you got to think of a lot of the things that drive trade beyond those necessities. A lot of times, continuity deals with luxury goods. Rich people in different civilizations wanting something, pretty exotic from a foreign land and paying a lot of money to get it. And we'll look at some of that here in a second, but you also got to think about some of the ramifications of trade in general. I'm talking diffusion of language, diffusion of religion, diffusion of technology, even diffusion of disease. Again, all these trends that we continue to see over and over again, they go all the way back to the earliest civilization. So even though there's not much on the test directly over these groups, know that those trends that I just identified, you're going to see questions connected to that. You're going to see these trends kind of repeat themselves over and over again. And if you can remember those trends, even if you can't remember every detail about the civilizations, I think you're going to be in pretty good shape. So again, these are our main civilizations from kind of the very beginning of the time, all the way up to 600 BCE. Roughly 2,600 years ago. Our next group of civilizations are the classical civilizations, also kind of ancient civilizations. First, you need to know the concept of the city-state. Okay, I'd maybe put some stars around that, city-states. During this time period, and we see it throughout history, but during this time period, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Maya would be excellent examples of city-states. A city-state is essentially a very small country where you've got a central city and then you've got all the surrounding land. So like the Maya, not a united civilization for most of their history. They are a group of city-states that we kind of collectively put together because culturally they are more or less the same, even though politically they're independent of each other. We know that the Maya city-states, they had their own kings that they believed were more or less gods. They often traded with each other. They often warred with each other. Okay, they weren't often politically, connected. Culturally, they were. That's why we call them all the Maya. Same deal with the Greeks. Ancient Greece is very mountainous, very hard to unite. You didn't see it very often. It did happen a couple times. But for most of their history, the Greeks, they are independent politically of each other. But we still get a lot of ideas from the Greeks. A lot of their views on philosophy and science, will be borrowed later on by civilizations like the Islamic caliphates. Probably, though, the most important thing is democracy, the idea of power coming from the people in some way, shape, or form. Greek democracy, and we're talking Athens, Greece. We're not talking every city-state because, again, politically, they all did their own thing. But in Athens, they did have a democracy. They had a direct democracy where male landowning citizens could come out and directly kind of participate in government decision-making. Just know, though, it wasn't exactly like democracy today. You had to be a male. You had to own X amount of property. Women, foreigners, slaves, a lot of people could not vote. So it was not perfect. But the idea was pretty sound. So sound that the Romans, later after they conquer the Greeks, will kind of copy that idea, but they'll make it for a larger group, a republic, a representative government. The Roman Republic eventually becomes the Roman Empire, but for a while they did have 3 branches of government, and they did limit the powers of government. And frankly, the United States, much later on, will look at the structure of Rome's republic. They will look at the ideals of the Athenians' democracy, and they will at least try to institute some of that stuff, which we've talked about pretty recently. Moving a little bit to the east, let's talk about the Qin, the Han, kind of just all the Chinese dynasties. Guys, it is super difficult to remember every single detail about every single Chinese dynasty. Then you got the Shang, the Zhao, the Qin, the Han, the Sui, the Tang, the Song. It goes on and on and on. Remember the continuities. Remember the things that you typically see all the time. The mandate of heaven is always there. Especially once the Han take over, you have a very elaborate government bureaucracy where there's all these different offices, all these different divisions in government, and everybody kind of does their own thing. It's a very efficient way to manage your government sometimes. Other empires of the time, like the Persians, will do something very similar. But the Chinese bureaucracy, pretty well organized. And a lot of that comes from them really taking a concerted effort to educate their people and get the best government workers, into their government. They did this through civil service testing, okay? And that's all based on Confucian values. Remember, Confucianism, that's a big continuity in Chinese history, especially when you look at the government. A lot of their ideals come from Confucianism because he was so big on education. In some respects, that was awesome. It made them very well organized. But on the other hand, Confucianism, like a lot of other belief systems at the time, very patriarchal. A great example of that is foot binding, which is, that messed up practice where they break young girls' feet, usually from the upper classes. On one hand, it's a status symbol. On the other hand, it's terrible, and it restricts their movement quite a bit. What else? Big continuity, and this goes back earlier, but it really becomes apparent during this time period. Empires do things to facilitate trade. The Romans built thousands of miles of roads. The Persians had the Persian Railroad. The Chinese invested in their infrastructure heavily through roads. Eventually, they construct that giant Grand Canal, I believe, under the Tang Dynasty. Also know that, in facilitating all this trade, you're not just going to get trade goods, you're also going to get some of those unintended things, like religion. It's during this time period, 600 BCE to 600 CE, that you see most of the world's really major religions start to solidify themselves, start to spread. You got to know some of the basics of the religions. All right, a long time ago, we did a religions chart. And one of the things I said was, there's some vocab that's kind of associated with each religion. some key beliefs. Christianity, you got the Holy Trinity. Judaism and Christianity, you've got like the Ten Commandments. Islam, you've got the 5 pillars of Islam. I would know what each of the 5 pillars says. That's going to be important, based on their holy book of the Quran. Buddhism, you've got the 4 Noble Truths. Again, some of those terms and names you've got to be able to associate with the religion that they belong to. There are a few questions that connect to that. So the religion chart, if you got access to it, that wouldn't be a bad thing to at least give a good once over. You also need to know the how and the why and the where these religions spread to. Christianity, you've got throughout the Mediterranean mainly. Mediterranean, and eventually really solidifying throughout Western Europe. Again, one of the reasons it spread, well, a few reasons, like some other religions, Buddhism and Christianity have a lot in common in this regard. They spread along the trade routes. They benefited from the support of the lower classes of people because, again, it gave those lower classes some hope for a future of enlightenment or heaven. But also, both Christianity and Buddhism especially had government sponsors. For Buddhism, you had the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, who became a Buddhist, then sponsored Buddhist missionaries to travel along the Silk Road and spread it further to the east. Christianity, very similarly, even though the Romans are the ones who crucified Jesus, much later on, about 300 years later on, you've got the Emperor Constantine, who becomes a Christian, and that does help the religion spread. Again, religions usually spread through proselytizing, missionary work, trade, travel, and warfare. Although warfare, it's usually not, convert or die. It's usually a little bit different than that. But Christianity and Buddhism, at least early on, it wasn't so much warfare. It was more of those other things. Remember the areas where these religions become prominent. Again, Christianity, you're looking in Europe, you're looking around the Mediterranean. Judaism, pretty small, still is. You're looking originally in the Middle East, but, eventually most the Jews of the Middle East kind of dispersed throughout the Mediterranean, more into Europe where, again, they're going to face persecution. We'll get more into that later. Islam, you see start on the Arabian Peninsula in what is now Saudi Arabia. It soon spreads through a lot of the ways that we just mentioned throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and then mainly because of trade, you see it spread a lot of places throughout the Indian Ocean, places like Indonesia. Buddhism starts in India, mainly gets popular elsewhere because of the Silk Road trade. You see it get popular especially in East and Southeast Asia. And then Hinduism, you're mainly looking at the Indian subcontinent, although there is some presence in Southeast Asia as well, again, mainly through trade. Again, one of the big things that allowed all these religions to spread were the trade routes. Big trade networks you need to know. You've got the Silk Roads connecting East Asia all the way with Eastern Europe. You've got Indian Ocean trade, which connects, East Asia all the way to the Middle East and Africa. You've got some of the Mediterranean sea lanes. We don't really talk about them much, but they're there. And then, of course, you've got trans-Saharan trade connecting Northern Africa to Western Africa. Again, early on, the land-based routes were going to be more popular. But as time progressed, when maritime technology got better, especially in the old world, you're going to see more and more trade shift to the Indian Ocean. Sort of things that are spreading. Again, luxury goods, that's a continuity. Silk Road, you got things like silk. Trans-Saharan trade, gold and salt are big deals. Indian Ocean trade, lots of spices. Again, there's more than that, but those are some of the things to remember. Also know that religion and disease, they're going to spread a lot on these routes as well. We get up to our post-classical era, right to the cusp of our actual curriculum, 600 CE to 1200 CE. Man, things are booming. More trade than ever. A lot of our empires have been replaced and absorbed by others, but still a lot of the same groups. You still got the Chinese, although a series of successive dynasties had taken over. Like we said earlier, the Tang Dynasty, the Grand Canal, they do sponsor infrastructure. You've got the rise of the Islamic caliphates at this point. First, the Abbasids. They were kind of the big power in the region prior to different groups of Turks from Central Asia kind of coming in and taking over their territory. The Seljuk Turks are the ones that really start to get into it with the Byzantine Empire, which is kind of the latter-day Roman Empire, kind of helping to initiate the Crusades. Probably the biggest new player during this time period is the Mongols. Again, the Mongols, they're Central Asian nomads. Genghis Khan, kind of brings them all together, and they, over a short period of time, build the largest contiguous empire in human history. How do they do it? They're excellent archers. They're excellent, on horseback. They use psychological warfare. They are very good at adopting the technology and techniques of those they conquer, like gunpowder. They're probably the most responsible for spreading gunpowder technology to the West. They find useful individuals in the places they conquer, and they move them around to help run their empire. Again, because of this, they usher in, after all their conquests, an era of stability that really helps to revitalize Silk Road trade. We call that the Pax Mongolica. Again, they did a lot of really bad things. And really, even with the restabilization of trade, you could say, hey, that's one of the reasons the Black Death makes its way from east to west. But the Mongols, definitely worth knowing about. You got to know the role of trade cities. Again, lots of new trade cities spring up, due to the fact that trade's just booming. Baghdad's a great example. First, very wealthy city for the Abbasid Caliphate. That's where the House of Wisdom was. Eventually, though, the Abbasids, like I said, get taken over. The Mongols conquer them. The Turks come in and take a bunch of territory. In our next time period, roughly our next time period, the Ottomans will eventually come over, and they'll be the main Muslim power in the Middle East for years to come. You also got Japan at this point, which, much like Western Europe, is adopting feudalism, where you have a king, or in Japan's case, essentially a shogun on top, and then, they give out grants of land to less powerful noblemen below them in exchange for loyalty and protection. And then the peasants and, unfortunately, the serfs, they just got to kind of do all the work and grow all the food and all of that stuff. I feel pretty good about that. Networks of exchange, again, you've got your trade routes. Towards the bottom of the slide, though, there's all sorts of little things to remember. On the Silk Road, you've got all these new trade cities, but again, it's not just trade goods that travel. Technology, techniques, paper money, things of that nature. They do move along the trade routes, as does disease. Again, the Khanates, the Mongols, are really known for transferring a lot of knowledge from the east to the west, and even, adopting a lot of the knowledge kind of acquired by the Arab Muslim world. As far as Indian Ocean trade, this is the time period where it gets much more prominent. And a lot of that has to do with the diffusion of technology and ideas. You get the compass coming from China, moving to the west. You've got the astrolabe, which had been around forever, goes all the way back to ancient Greece. The Muslims were using it. They spread that technology. And, of course, knowledge of monsoon winds is going to expedite that situation. As far as trans-Saharan trade, you've got very wealthy empires, first Ghana, later Mali. They kind of operate as the trade hubs out of their capital city of Timbuktu, kind of monopolizing the gold and salt trade for many years. And of course, during this time period, you've got the spread of everything else. Religion along the trade routes, gunpowder from east to west, paper technology from east to west. You also have some pretty legendary travelers that help to expose people to how others lived in it. You also got biological diffusion. The biggest one, in addition to some crops that kind of moved along the trade routes, you got bubonic plague. They moved along the trade routes. We talked about it. Rats on the trade ships that had those fleas that infected them. They went into areas all over. They went all the way to Europe, where it wiped out close to half the population, especially in urban areas with terrible sanitation, where they didn't know that much about medicine. I mean, this was seen literally as the wrath of God. Now, in our next time period, 1450 to 1750, you see a lot of those older empires get replaced by new land-based empires we call gunpowder empires. We're talking about the Ottomans and the Mughals and the Safavids and the Ming and later the Qing. You've got the Russians, Again, remember gunpowder, that technology. That's one of the things that really allowed all of these empires to establish themselves. But also remember that role of monumental architecture we talked about earlier. Same thing. They're projecting power. Taj Mahal, the Versailles, St. Basil's Cathedral, just to name a few. But in addition to our land-based empires, you've now got some maritime empires, some European maritime empires, which will develop because once the Ottomans come on the scene and conquer Constantinople, they rename it Istanbul, they eliminate the Byzantine, essentially. You've got these European nations that are looking for new ways to access Asian trade, Indian Ocean trade. A lot of it has to do with the diffusion of knowledge, the diffusion of technology. Knowing more about wind patterns and monsoons and tides and currents, having greater access to the astrolabe and the compass and better ships and just better technology in general. Having the ability to divine new ships, such as the Caravel, and having explorers willing to take the risk to go out there. Starts with the Portuguese, later spreads to the Spanish, but soon after, others follow suit. And they establish maritime empires, mainly in the New World, but you do see sort of trading post empires develop in the Old World as well. Again, why are they doing it? The gold, the God, the glory. The Spanish are the first to really focus on the New World. The Portuguese, early on, are mainly focused on the Old World. We become more connected as a species. Some places embrace that. Some places get colonized, where the Europeans just used joint stock companies to set up shop for them. Other places withdraw. We know that both China and Japan kind of become more or less isolated. A lot of that is the fear of, that one G, the God. They don't want Christianity coming in and destabilizing their classical societies. It's not that they didn't trade, they did. But the Chinese limited it to certain port cities. Japan very heavily limited it, mainly just dealing with the Dutch because they didn't really try to spread the faith all that much. Again, remember, this whole idea of colonialism. Remember the idea of mercantilism, that these European nations were trying to stockpile gold and silver, and they were using a lot of these joint stock companies overseas to build these colonies for them. Biggest things that happens during this time period is the Columbian Exchange. Starts with Christopher Columbus, 1492, kind of throughout the 1500s, but is the largest example of cultural, biological, technological diffusion in human history. The Europeans bring over a lot of diseases, amongst other things, but the diseases like smallpox wipe out a lot of the native population of Latin America. They bring cash crops like sugar. But the native workforce largely dies off. That's really the beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade. From the New World to the Old, you get a lot of nutrient-rich foods, which greatly increases populations, especially in Europe, but Africa to some extent as well. But on the other hand, that population pressure just leads more and more people to come to the Americas. And eventually, where we're at now, a lot of these places in the Americas are going to end up fighting for their independence. The name of the game during these years for the maritime empires was mercantilism. Set up colonies overseas, extract as much resource as you can, you know, and really have a lot of oversight on what the colonies do. Mercantilism, as you know, later on will be challenged and kind of done away with by capitalism, but mercantilism is the name of the game. It's how a lot of these early European nations get really rich. And a big part of mercantilism, unfortunately, was the transatlantic slave trade, where manufactured goods would be taken into Africa, traded for enslaved persons who would go across the Middle Passage. Lots of people died. They had come to the New World. They would work largely on plantations, procuring cash crops. And then these crops and other resources would head back to Europe, and the whole evil, twisted thing would go on literally for hundreds of years. Now, obviously, there's more that you should probably know, but that's the gist of it. I didn't go over every single thing that's on the test, but I'm telling you, if I mentioned it, it was for a reason. Couple things I want to show you, then we'll be done for the day. I was hoping to finish up sooner, but hey, you know, it is what it is. You guys are first period. That's how it works. On my Canvas page, there's a couple things that could additionally help you. Again, I'm not saying this is mandatory, but you've got the Heimler's history videos that I'm sure you guys hate by now, but still, if you click on that, it's going to go to the Heimler webpage. You could watch the unit review videos. He's got smaller videos over specific topics, and if you want to get crazy and just watch every video, hey, more power to you. But he's got the history before 1200 video, and then he's got a video for Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4. They're about 10 minutes each, maybe a little bit shorter. We've actually watched all those in here before, but you know, it might be good to kind of give you a decent review of some of the things that maybe we missed. Also, the other thing that I'd recommend, this Freemanpedia curriculum overview. This, you know, give a good once over. Again, they do have it divided up into units, and then they have it divided up into subsections. That's where I got a lot of those maps from. But again, you could go to like the global tapestry. Then they divide it up into, they'll kind of tell you who all's around. They'll then divide it up into different geographical areas for you. Again, and my computer's running slow, so you can't see everything, but there's video clips, there's all sorts of good stuff. But the very bottom of each one of those, they've got this little part. Too long, didn't read. It's a good overview of some of the stuff you need to know of each of those places. So if nothing else, if you went on there and just kind of glanced over that stuff, I do think it'd be advantageous to you. But again, I'm going to leave that up to you. Now, at this point, and I know I just talked like for 30 some odd minutes straight. Does anybody got any questions? Again, I know that was a lot. But if it seemed like I was just spouting out random stuff, it wasn't random, guys. If you paid attention, if you jot down some notes, I think that gives you some reminders of some things to study up on. If you study for this thing, if you do your test review, I don't think that this is really all that bad. I honestly, even though it's long, I think it's one of the easier tests we've done. But you still need to study for it because it is going to have a good or bad impact on your grade. So, you know, do what you need to do. We got about 11 minutes left. That's not much time. But if you want to work on your test review, you certainly can. If you've got something else you need to work on, you certainly can. Again, the test review is going to be due on Friday before you leave. You know, you might still owe me something. Obviously, if it's late, it's late, but get that to me as soon as possible. The semester ends on Friday at 1:05. I'm not accepting anything after that. So just kind of keep that in mind, plan accordingly. And if you need anything, please let me know.